All right, welcome back to another tutorial in Maya. All right, today we're going to take a look at Global Illumination. And this tutorial was sort of suggested by a subscriber that goes by the handle of Sweater Swag. All right, so this is for you, Mr. Swag. All right, let's look at global illumination. What is it? I mean, it's a little bit of a mystery. You always hear global illumination, this or that. Well, global illumination is sort of like, say, we take a singular light and put it in the scene, and when that light projects out onto the objects in the scene, it bounces light back onto the other surfaces. And naturally, it's going to cause some light bleeding and some really nice effects. I mean, you can essentially do still renders or scene renders with global illumination, and it gives you a really nice, realistic, lifelike kind of feel to everything that's going on. But you got to remember that global illumination, every surface in this scene affects the way things look. So you can get into quite a bit of render time as you're sort of using global illumination. So that's something you have to really pay attention to. And in order to activate global illumination, we need to do a few things with our lights and adjust some settings and things like that in order to get it to look right. So essentially what you're seeing here is just a singular plane, a torus. I think I assigned an MIA material to this. Just you could do any kind of shader. And then just a blend attached to a text object here. So, and then I have a singular spotlight going on. So no big deal. But look at this right in here. See this nice color bleed? It's sort of coming from the spotlight hitting the torus and then sort of bouncing off the torus and reflecting back onto the wall. And that's cool. Here it is in a couple of different forms. Let's see, here's a yellow. I just reassigned this color, made it a yellow, and then this one's a blue over here. So look at what happens to this underneath here and sort of the overall look when you change the colors of a material. You can get some nice effects. So anyway, that just sort of illustrates that color bleed. Another thing that you'll notice too is that because I put a white card in underneath all of this, the light is reflecting back from this card back up to the wall. So essentially you'll see the gradation is a little bit less here. We still have some color bleed, but light is bouncing off this card and it's sort of being recalculated and thrown back onto this wall. So there's the same scene without that card in there. So anyway, everything affects what you're doing in your scene when you're rendering with global illumination. All right. So it's a pretty simple concept, but you really kind of have to see what we're looking for to get to in order to actually start fine-tuning global illumination. And you can see the card right in here. It's reflecting off of this blend surface or this MIA material. And, it's right in there in that reflection. So anyway, if we take a little bit closer look at what happens in the process, here's kind of what we'll be going through. We're going to establish we're going to make a simple sphere and a torus and a plane and have a spotlight coming down on there. And over the period of refining this, we're going to go from this render and we're going to sort of get into it here a little bit bigger. And then you can see where as we fine tune these parameters, it goes from looking pretty rough like that to a little bit better like this, and a little bit better, and a little bit better. And there it is. I just did something that I'm going to show you what happens later. And then, just basically brought the qualities up. There I totally took all the the global illumination qualities off and turned it back on. And then essentially just assigned one of these objects a color. So, essentially you can see what global illumination does. It's kind of a cool effect. And there it is without. Here it is with very low photon levels. And here it is increased a little bit, increased a little more, increased a little more, and then increased a little more. And then there it is with nothing at all. And so, yeah, Essentially, we're going to work to create a scene where we're illuminating everything globally with global illumination. So that's what we're going to check out today. So before we do that, make sure you go over and check out Lester Banks, because he's got good stuff for your brain all the time. In this case, for you guys who like to blow stuff up and make stuff shatter, there's a cool tutorial up there by Ian Wasclosely, or I can't read that name, but anyway, go over there and check out Lester Banks. Under the Maya tutorials, you're going to find some good stuff. And then as well, I thank all my subscribers. I'm now at 5,000 and above, and we've had about over 1 million hits on the tutorials on my deep fried ectoplasm channel. So that's cool. Thanks, everybody. All right, well, let's get to it. Let's create a scene. Let's just sort of start out with good old boring toruses and spheres, and let's see where this takes us. So I'm going to get rid of that for a second. And I've already built a scene here, so I think what I'll do, you can go ahead and just create yourself a torus, and I think I'll reassign this torus a Lambert, and we'll go from default. And this light, I think I'll just delete this light, because that light is important, because everything that we're going to do here has to do with the properties of the light to begin with. So that's great. What I want to do is just build a scene like this. You take a moment out here and push pause and build this scene, and just sort of put your plane down below there, put a torus in, put a sphere in, and we're good to go. All right. So now let's create a light, and the best thing to do with global illumination is use a point light, spotlight, or area light. The directional light isn't such a good choice for doing this because of, well, it's a tutorial for another day, but just be aware that a directional light is not a good light to do this with. So anyway, I think I'll just do a spotlight. I'll go ahead and create one down there, and we'll bring it up off the surface here a little bit. Might enable my lights over here in my render, and I think I might take that light and just sort of rotate it a bit here on its x-axis. We'll just go -90. There it is, and I'll bring it up over the scene a little bit here, and we'll go up there a bit. And I think what I'll do is just go into its attributes right now, and we'll come up here to the top and just sort of give that cone angle a little bit more cone angle. I don't know, little penumbra drop off, a little bit of drop off, but I think I'll leave drop off alone for right now. I'll just go with the standard light. So all right, so we got that. Now let's do a quick render. I'm going to come in here, and we're going to sort of start from scratch here. We'll sort of get close up on that, and I'm going to do a quick render. There was my one from the last portion we did, and I'm going to go ahead and do a render, and there we go. And by default, you'll notice the light comes down, it hits the objects, but we really don't have any definition of the material underneath here, okay? So the light is not bouncing down and back up off this plane and into the objects. So the first thing I might want to do with this, just because it bugs me to look at crappy shadows, is to come down here, and I'm going to take depth map shadows off. So we'll get rid of our depth map shadows, and I'm going to come down here on the lights attributes for ray trace shadows, and I'm going to maybe bring the radius for the light up a little bit there, and bring in some shadows, kind of 25 or whatever. All right, and then I'm going to do another quick render, and we'll see what happens. All right, so there I am. I'm looking good now. My render settings over here are set to HD 720 because I would kind of need a little bit more. I want to see the picture a little bigger. So just be aware that that's where I set my that to. I'm going to take my quality and I'm going to dump it back down to draft for the moment. So we're all starting from default. That's where yours should be as well. I'm in Mental Ray. And let's come down here and look at one thing. When we're using global illumination, we want to make sure that this default light is deselected. And you know, it's good practice to get into, but just be aware that that default light can mess with you sometimes. So I always uncheck it when I'm doing this stuff. All right. And let's take a look at our indirect lighting. And you'll notice that the global illumination section over here is unchecked, and that in the features section, Global Illumination is also unchecked. And in our quality section, well, we've set it to draft, but if we come in here from draft and we come back and come into Global Illumination, that's what we want to be on. So I'm going to go ahead and click Preview Global Illumination. And you can tell that in your indirect lighting tab now, Global Illumination is now on. And in your features, it also shows up checked on your feature set. So it's sort of by default kind of enables itself in those various areas. So it's just something to be aware of. So now let's take a look at what it looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and do another render and look at my render time really closely down here. And that render time is like at 5 seconds, okay? And this doesn't look much different than the one we had before. I did a save on that, so let's sort of take a look at what happened. We corrected the shadows, and then we also enabled the global illumination. But you're not seeing any magic happen yet. There's nothing really happening because we have to make sure that this spotlight, and I'm going to sort of move this out of the way. Let's look at our spotlight up here and make sure that the emit photons is active. And let's see here, got to get up to the right section. Underneath your caustic and global illumination menu, you'll see emit photons. Okay, so now we're emitting some photons, and that's what global illumination needs in order to make this scene work. So let's come over here, I'll save that, and I'm going to go ahead and do another render. And there it is. Okay, well, I don't really see that much change. I'm going to go ahead and save this image, and we'll compare it to the last one. And there's the last one, and I don't really see that much of a change. But I haven't messed with these values over here at all, so let's look at those first. The photon intensity is going to give us a higher intensity light value, basically, by upping this. So right now, by default, it's at 8,000. So maybe I want to try something maybe more like 16,000 or something. So I'll go ahead and click in, do 16,000 there. And I'm going to go save that image, and we're going to do another render. And there it is. And we're at 6 seconds on this render. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And we're going to compare these two. There's not much of a difference. I can see a little bit of a difference as I toggle back and forth between those images. I can see a little bit more going on there, but still not quite enough. So let's do this. I'm going to just add another 0 into this photon intensity, and we'll see where that goes. So I'm going to go ahead and save that image, and now we'll take another render. And right away, you see a big difference. Okay, so we just pumped up that photon intensity a little bit. So that's the first thing to play around with in order to get kind of an idea of what's happening in there. So that's cool. Now, the exponent value will just increase or decrease this overall intensity. So if I set the exponent at 1 right there, I'll just go ahead and do that. We'll do a test render. Set it at 1. You can see it's going to be much brighter, all right? So exponentially it's making it brighter, but let's bring that down a little bit. Let's take this exponent and put that at, say, half that, which is like 2, all right? And that should get us back to where we were before. And if I make this exponent value 4, I'm going to go ahead and save that one, and we'll take this exponent and put it to 4. Let's do a save on that. It'll be much darker. So in this case, if it has a lower or a higher exponent value, you're going to bring way more intensity into this scene. So, you know, technically you can play around with those two values and see what they do. Okay? So there we go. I think I'll just bring this down to 2, which is the default value. And I'm going to go ahead and give that one, we'll get back to where we were at before. And there it is. Now you'll notice that it's kind of raggedy looking. We have some splotchiness to it and whatnot. And that comes from the accuracy. So in your render settings over here, as we start to fine tune this, you'll notice that in your indirect lighting, underneath your Global Illumination, you have accuracy and also a radius value. So in terms of what we're doing there, this, if you toggle over there, it says it controls the smoothness quality of Global Illumination. Well, we like smoothness, so let's take that value from, say, 500 and just sort of slowly start working it up. So I'll put that at like 1,000, and we'll do another render here. I'm going to save this one, and we'll move that up to 1,000. And you can see where it's not doing that much to increase, but a little bit. Here it was on our last render. Here's our newest render. And if you look down underneath here, you'll see where it starts to delineate a little bit more, starts to refine that shape a little more. So that's smoothing it. But what we also want to look at here, I'm going to bring this over here, is we want to look at this radius and give that some radius. So I'm going to set my radius at, say, 4, and we'll do another render, and we're going to see some of this start to clean itself up a bit. Okay, let's see what that looks like. So there was our last one, and here's our new one, from there to there. And you'll notice that it still looks a little splotchy, okay, but it's also starting to even itself out along here. So I may want to just increase this radius a little bit more. So we're at 4 now. I'm going to increase the radius to, say, 8. And I think on this accuracy, I'm going to increase this accuracy to, say, 9,000. All right, and we'll just slowly bring those values up and see when they start to affect our render time down here. And you only will get a certain quality. Now that's looking pretty good to me at the moment. And, that was just with a few. I'm going to go ahead and save that image, and we'll compare it against our last one, which was right there. And there's our new one. Okay, so by increasing our accuracy and upping our radius a little bit, it sort of helped smooth that out. Now let's do something interesting. Let's come over here, and I have a MIA material created, so if you want to do the same, just go to your materials and let's just create a regular MIA material. And in this case, I'll select my material right there. Let me move my render settings out of the way. And with this material right here, I think I might just sort of assign that a preset. So we'll go to a preset here, and I think in this case we'll do a matte plastic, and I'm going to go ahead and hit replace. And that's the default matte plastic color. I think I might want to make this more like a blue. So I'm going to just select our blue right there. And this will give us a nice color to kind of see what's going on. So technically, this plane right now is bouncing light back up into this scene. And if I click on, say, our torus, and I go ahead and reassign it that color, existing material, we'll go the MIA material 2. You're not going to see it in here necessarily if you're in high quality rendering, but I know that that's on there. So now let's do another render. Now that we have it all fine-tuned. And there we go. So you can see the bleed over, you can see the refinement and the overall look, and you can see some bleeding down here. This light is bouncing back up and illuminating this. And really it's sort of a matter of getting all this stuff to balance out at this point. But now you can see what Global Illumination is doing. It's basically taking that light from that one spotlight and bouncing it all over, and anything that has a color or a certain bleed value will be transferred onto your other objects. So that's pretty cool. You can look at the shadows down here, and in this case I might come over and choose my spotlight. That's from my tabs over here in my hypershade. I can choose the spotlight, and I'll move this over here a little bit. And in that spotlight shape, I may want to change these shadows up a little bit, because right now my shadow color is pure black, and rarely do we have pure black shadows, so I might want to bring those shadows up to, say, a little bit less black. We'll do another quick render. Okay, so that looks a little more like what it should look like, and we're still at 6 seconds overall. So that's pretty cool. Now, if you want to be a little more accurate with what's rendering in here, there are other options down here underneath the emit photons. You're going to notice that this global illuminated photons section down here, right now it's set at 10,000. I could up this value. Let's just go ahead and stick another 0 in here. Okay, that's going to introduce a lot more photons into the scene, and it's going to give us a little bit different look. So I'm going to go ahead and save this image right here. I'm going to go ahead and do another render. And there you go. So by introducing more photons into the scene, the render is going to look even better. But it's also going to come at the expense of a longer render time. All right, 23 seconds on that one. So I'll save this image and we'll compare it against our last one. Okay, so our last one was right there, and then we upped that photon level, and you can see the difference. So kind of smooth everything out. Keep your eye on all of this area right here. All right, so there it is. That's global illumination, and this is a relatively simple scene. I mean, I only have one shader in here, so you can see where you're going to run into some long render times for frames. The more say textures and things you have in here, and the more things going on, the more the light is bouncing around off of these surfaces. So it needs to calculate a lot more in order to give you a good render. So that's it. Okay. Let's see. Let's take one other look at. Let's come back into our render settings over here, and you have a number of different things. If you really want to see a visualization, which I don't really use that much, you can enable your map visualizer here. Okay, and I'm going to show you what that does. It's kind of freaky. Let's get this render sort of out of here a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and do a render. I'll save this one that we did last, and I'll do this render now. And as it goes through here, after it gets done rendering over here in your render view, it's going to sort of place a photon map over here so you can visualize what those photons are doing. All right. And you can see the photons in there. They look like specks right now. If I were to say, take my lights and my textures and take everything off, you can see those photons in there, and that's kind of what the photon map looks like. If we increase the value of our photons over here in this section, I might just say you could increase this to say maybe 20 or something like that. I don't know. Let's do another render. I'm going to save this, and we're going to compare the two. So essentially I've just increased the photon activity in here a lot more. So it should give us a lot better looking render, but again, it's going to come at the expense of render time down here. And you can notice that it's really going slow. All right. So this could take a minute or two, and this is why I dread doing a tutorial on global illumination, because if you have a scene with a ton of stuff in here, it's going to take a while for you to render this stuff out. So, down here I can see in the line down here that it's calculating, and it's at about 75%. Now it's at about 80. There's 85. And 90%, and then it'll start to render out. So anyway, here it goes. So now it's rendering out the image, and you can see that this is taking way long, and we're going to compare these two and find out if we really needed to add that many photons bouncing around in there. Well, right now I can see some anomalies occurring because of the high value of the photons there. And yeah, it's not really doing us much good. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. And you can see where we have a lot more activity with those photons in here. And it took, oh, this is a minute 35 to render. Minute 35. So thanks for bearing with me. Now, you know, that may or may not be what you want. I don't know. But I'm going to go ahead and turn everything back on here. And in order to get rid of this photon map, you may want to come over here, and we're going to say take our values of our photons back down here. But let's just do this. Let's take these down to, say, 0, and we'll do a quick render. I'm going to come over here. We'll save that. Do a quick render. And with no photons bouncing around in there at all, we have a 5-second render. So that's kind of the trade-off. Now, you'll notice that in the view over here, we'd now no longer see any of those photons mapped in the viewport. So it's good to turn off that visualizer now so we don't keep, you know, having that show up as, you know, photons information over here. So I'm going to take that aside, and I'm going to make this illuminated, the photon level at let's make it 10,000 and do a quick render. All right. Okay, and there it is. So that's 6 seconds. I'm going to go ahead and save that. And comparatively, it looks pretty good compared to some of our other ones. But that's the way you do it. That's how you fine-tune this stuff. And yeah, all right. So play around with that. Play around with it for a day or two, maybe 3 or 4, and you'll get the hang of it. And remember, be a good person because the world is counting on you. And thanks for watching. And oh yeah, read a book. Put down the video games. All right, and thanks for watching.